My name is Natalie, 33 years old, and I am a senior forensic accountant. At 2 in the morning, alone in a freezing Chicago hotel room, my phone illuminated the darkness with a picture of my 8-year-old daughter, Lily. She was supposed to be tucked safely into bed at our Miami home with my husband, Gavin. Instead, her terrified sobs echoed through the speaker. The power was out. The house was pitch black, and Gavin had been missing since the previous afternoon. He thought leaving her alone to fund his secret $35,000 luxury vacation was a foolproof plan. He forgot who he was married to. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you have ever had to turn your heartbreak into cold, calculated justice. You will not want to miss how I tracked down his dirty secrets and destroyed his perfect getaway in less than 3 hours. The audit for a massive corporate merger had kept me in Chicago for 3 days. My hotel desk was covered in financial reports and empty coffee cups. I was just about to close my laptop when the ringtone shattered the silence. Seeing Lily calling at 2 in the morning sent an immediate spike of ice water through my veins. I answered on the first ring. "Mom." Her small voice trembled, cracking with pure panic. "Mom, where are you?" "It is completely dark and I am so scared." I sat bolt upright, knocking a pen off the desk. "Sweetheart, I am right here. I am on the phone with you. Where is Dad?" "Why is it dark?" She sobbed harder, the sound breaking my heart into pieces. "The lights went away a long time ago. Daddy said he was going to the store to get milk after lunch yesterday. He never came back. I have been hiding under my blankets." I checked the weather application on my laptop. Miami was clear, no storms, no reason for a blackout unless the utility bill went unpaid. And Gavin was in charge of the utilities. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain steady and soothing for her sake. Lily listened to me very carefully. "You are doing great. Keep your doors locked and stay under the covers. I am going to get you help right now. Keep this phone charged and do not hang up." I put her on speaker and grabbed my work phone, dialing Gavin immediately. It went straight to voicemail. Not ringing, just the automated prompt. He had turned his phone completely off. A husband and father does not just vanish for 14 hours with his phone powered down unless he is in a hospital, a morgue, or a bed that does not belong to him. The emotional wife in me wanted to scream, but the forensic accountant in me took the wheel. I operate on facts, data, and rapid response. I merged the call and dialed the Miami Police Department requesting an emergency welfare check on an abandoned minor at my address. The dispatcher assured me a squad car was 3 minutes away, but 3 minutes felt like an absolute eternity when my little girl was crying in the dark. I needed someone I could trust implicitly, someone who could break down a door if necessary and make sure my daughter was safe. Without hesitation, I dialed Jamal. Jamal is my sister's husband, an imposing African-American former United States Marshal who now runs an elite private security and aviation firm in South Beach. He is the kind of man who commands respect the moment he enters a room, and more importantly, he loves Lily like his own daughter. He answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly from sleep, but instantly alert. "Jamal, I need you at my house right now," I said, pacing the length of the hotel room. "Gavin is gone. The power is out. Lily is home completely alone and terrified. I just dispatched the police, but she needs family." I heard the rustle of sheets and the heavy thud of his boots hitting the floor. "I am out the door, Natalie. I am 10 minutes away. I will have my security dispatcher tap into your neighborhood cameras on my way. Do not panic. I have got her. Hang tight." With Jamal on the move and the police en route, I finally exhaled. But the fear was quickly being swallowed by a burning, furious suspicion. Where the hell was my husband? I ended the call with Jamal and turned my eyes back to my glowing laptop screen. If Gavin was hiding, I was going to follow the money and find exactly where he went. I threw my clothes into my suitcase without folding them, my mind racing faster than my hands. Within 10 minutes, I was out of the hotel lobby and sitting in the back of a speeding taxi heading straight for O'Hare International Airport. The streetlights of Chicago blurred past the window, but I was not paying attention to the view. I had my laptop open on my knees, connected to my encrypted mobile hotspot. Gavin thought he was clever. He was the vice president of regional sales for a pharmaceutical company, a man who wore expensive suits and loved hearing the sound of his own voice in boardrooms. He always believed he was the smartest person in the room. But he was not a forensic accountant. He did not spend his days dissecting complex financial frauds, tracing hidden offshore accounts, or breaking through corporate firewalls. He was an amateur trying to play a professional game. I navigated to our primary joint banking portal. Access denied. Invalid password. I tried his usual variations, the ones he had used for years. Nothing worked. He had completely locked me out of our shared finances. A normal wife might have called the bank hotline and waited hours for customer service. I did not have hours. I had software I used to audit fraudulent executives. I ran a script to bypass the standard authentication, pulling the digital breadcrumbs he left behind on our shared home server. Within 4 minutes, I breached his updated security protocols and gained full administrative access to every single account under his social security number. I started with his personal checking account. Empty. I moved to the joint savings. Drained to the absolute minimum balance. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands remained completely steady on the keyboard. I opened the credit card statements next. There it was. A pending charge that made my blood run absolutely cold. $35,000 processed just 24 hours ago. The merchant name was Royal Caribbean International. I pulled up the transaction details and cross-referenced the booking code through a travel agency backdoor portal I had special access to. Gavin had booked the Royal Suite, the most expensive and exclusive room available on the oasis of the seas. The itinerary showed the ship was headed straight for the Bahamas. He was not missing. He was not in danger. He was on a luxury cruise while our 8-year-old daughter sat terrified in a pitch-black house. And he was not traveling alone. The secondary passenger registered on the VIP boarding pass was Sienna. She was his brand-new 25-year-old assistant who spent more time taking pictures for her social media than doing actual work. He had told me she was just a kid trying to learn the corporate ropes. Apparently, he was teaching her those ropes in a $35,000 suite. The betrayal was sharp, but the anger quickly mutated into a chilling, calculated focus. A VP of sales makes good money, but Gavin lived well beyond his means. He drove a leased sports car, bought custom watches, and constantly tried to impress his wealthy clients. He did not have $35,000 in liquid cash to just drop on a vacation without me noticing. I needed to know exactly where that money came from. I opened the investment portfolios. Our retirement accounts were untouched. Then I clicked on the custodial accounts. I clicked on Lily's college fund. The screen loaded. The balance, which had taken me 8 years of bonuses and strict budgeting to build, stared back at me. It was supposed to hold over $45,000. The current balance was $500. A massive withdrawal of $40,000 had been executed the previous morning. The cash was transferred directly to Gavin's private checking account, and from there, used to pay off the massive credit card charge for the cruise. My vision actually tunneled. The air in the back of the taxi felt thin. Gavin had not just cheated on me. He had not just abandoned our child in the dark. He had actively robbed her. He took the money meant for her future education, the money I worked 70-hour weeks to save, and spent it to impress a 25-year-old girl on a luxury boat. The cab driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, politely asking if the air conditioning was too cold. I met his eyes and told him it was absolutely fine. I safely closed the banking portal and quickly opened a new tab to track the vessel. I did not want to cry. I simply wanted to completely and utterly destroy him forever. I stepped out of the taxi at the airport terminal just as my phone buzzed in my hand. It was Jamal. I answered immediately, bracing myself for whatever he was going to say. "I got her, Natalie." His deep voice boomed through the speaker, instantly lifting a massive weight off my chest. Lily is safe. She is sitting in my truck with the heat on, drinking a juice box. My security team is clearing the perimeter of your property just to be absolutely sure, but she is physically perfectly fine. I let out a breath. I felt like I had been holding for an entire hour. Thank God. Did you find anything in the house? I heard his heavy footsteps walking across our hardwood floors. The house is a disaster, he said. The main breaker was tripped, which is why the power was out. But that is not the worst part. I am standing in your kitchen right now. Gavin left a sticky note on the island counter. He cleared his throat and read the note aloud. Lily Daddy got called into a late-night emergency meeting for work. Be a big girl and go to sleep. I will be back before breakfast. Love, Dad. A late-night emergency meeting. He actually wrote that down on a piece of paper and left it for an 8-year-old child to find. He did not even bother to call a babysitter because he wanted to save a few bucks, completely ignoring the fact that he had just stolen $40,000 from her. I gripped the handle of my suitcase so hard my knuckles turned white. Jamal, he is not at a meeting. He is on the oasis of the seas. He booked the royal suite with his 25-year-old assistant and drained Lily's college fund to pay for it. The ship is heading straight to the Bahamas. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I knew that silence well. It was the sound of a former United States Marshal switching from a concerned family member into tactical mode. "Give me 10 seconds, Jamal said. I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard as he patched into his private security firm's aviation and maritime tracking software. "Oasis of the seas," he muttered. "Okay, I have it on satellite." It did not just head to the Bahamas, Natalie. It arrived. The ship docked exactly 1 hour ago at the exclusive VIP private port in Bimini. They are probably getting ready to have breakfast on the island right now. My flight to Miami boards in 20 minutes, I told him as I walked briskly toward the security checkpoint. I will land by 4:30 in the morning. I am going straight to a family lawyer and then I am going to the police station to press charges for child abandonment and financial theft. I will bury him in paperwork. No, you will not. Jamal interrupted, his voice dropping an octave. Paperwork gives him time to hide. Paperwork gives him time to hire a defense attorney with your stolen money and spin a story about a misunderstanding. You do not wait for the legal system to send a polite letter, Natalie. You catch him red-handed while he thinks he has gotten away with it. I stopped dead in my tracks in the middle of the busy terminal. What exactly are you suggesting, Jamal? I am the chief executive officer of an elite security firm, Natalie, he replied, the edge in his voice sharp and dangerous. I have a twin-engine corporate helicopter fueled and sitting on my private helipad right now. My pilots are on standby 24 hours a day. You land in Miami at 4:30. I will have a secure vehicle waiting on the tarmac to bring you straight to my hangar. We are going to fly to Bimini ourselves. Are you serious? I asked, my heart pounding a new rhythm of pure adrenaline. We are talking about crossing international waters to crash a private island. Jamal laughed, but there was zero humor in it. I still have my federal badge, and I hold high-level international security clearance. I can land my chopper anywhere I want. He messed with my niece, Natalie. He left her in the dark. Nobody does that to our family. You just get on that flight to Miami. I will handle the airspace. I hung up the phone. The tears that had been threatening to fall all night completely evaporated. I handed my ID and boarding pass to the security agent. Gavin thought he had orchestrated the perfect getaway. He thought he could steal from his own daughter and sip champagne on a tropical island while I was busy crunching numbers in Chicago. He was about to find out exactly what happens when a forensic accountant and a furious ex-marshal team up to collect a debt. The wheels of my commercial flight touched down on the Miami runway at exactly 4:30 in the morning. I did not even wait for the plane to reach the main terminal. As we taxied, a sleek black sport utility vehicle with heavily tinted windows pulled up alongside the aircraft. Jamal had called in a massive favor with the local port authority. I walked down the emergency metal stairs straight onto the tarmac, where one of Jamal's heavily armed security contractors opened the vehicle door for me. We sped across the dark airfield toward a private aviation hangar located on the far east side of the airport. The heavy steel doors of the hangar were already open, revealing a massive twin-engine corporate helicopter. Its blades were already spinning rapidly, cutting through the thick morning air and creating a deafening roar. Jamal stood by the open side door wearing tactical cargo pants and a black windbreaker with his elite security firm logo on the chest. He looked every bit the federal agent he used to be. He reached out, grabbed my hand firmly, and pulled me up into the leather seat next to him. "Lily is still fast asleep at my place," he said over the noise of the engine, as he handed me a heavy aviation headset with a built-in microphone. "My wife is sitting right next to her bed. She will not wake up alone. Are you ready for this?" I strapped on my 4-point safety harness and locked eyes with him. I have never been more ready for anything in my entire life. Jamal gave a sharp nod to the pilot, and the helicopter smoothly lifted off the concrete pad, banking aggressively over the glowing neon skyline of South Beach. The flight to Bimini would take just under an hour. I did not intend to waste a single minute of that time staring out the window at the ocean. I opened my laptop and placed it firmly on my knees. I had already uncovered Gavin stealing from his own flesh and blood. Now I wanted to see what else he was hiding, specifically what he was stealing from his employer. Gavin was the vice president of regional sales for a major pharmaceutical company. He managed a massive marketing budget supposedly used for luxury client dinners, expensive medical conferences, and high-end promotional events. But as a forensic accountant, I know that marketing budgets are the absolute easiest place for dirty executives to hide stolen money. I logged into a secure database that allowed me to view public records, corporate filings, and vendor payment histories. Then, using administrative access codes I had previously shoulder-surfed from Gavin, I penetrated his department's internal expense reporting system. I started filtering the financial data for the past 6 months, looking for classic accounting anomalies. I looked for duplicate invoice numbers, perfectly rounded dollar amounts, and new vendors that had zero digital footprint. It took me less than 15 minutes to find the bleeding artery. There was a vendor listed as a digital media consultancy firm. Over the last 4 months, Gavin had approved 12 separate invoices to this exact company, totaling exactly $1.2 million. The invoices claimed the money was for a regional advertising push on various social media platforms. I pulled the routing numbers attached to those corporate payments. The money was not going to a legitimate domestic bank account. It was being wired directly to an offshore holding account located in the Cayman Islands. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I ran a deep background search on the corporate registration of that specific consultancy firm. The screen refreshed, displaying the filed articles of incorporation. The registered agent and sole proprietor of the shell company was not a seasoned pharmaceutical advertiser. It was Sienna. I stared at the screen, my blood running colder than the blasting air conditioning inside the cabin. This was not just a pathetic midlife crisis affair. This was felony corporate embezzlement, international money laundering, and severe wire fraud. Gavin was creating fake vendor invoices, approving them himself, and funneling over $1 million of corporate funds directly into the pockets of his 25-year-old mistress. She was acting as his dedicated money mule. They probably thought they were brilliant criminal masterminds. They were actually just sloppy, arrogant amateurs leaving a massive, highly illegal paper trail. I saved every single document, every fake invoice, and every offshore wire transfer confirmation to an encrypted folder right on my desktop. I had enough hard evidence to put both of them in federal prison for a very long time. "Hey!" Jamal's voice crackled through my headset, breaking my intense concentration. "Look up." I closed my laptop and looked out the front windshield of the helicopter. The sun was just beginning to rise over the dark expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, casting a brilliant orange and purple glow across the choppy water. Dead ahead, rising out of the ocean like a massive floating city, was the tropical island of Bimini. Docked at the massive private pier was the oasis of the seas. The sheer ridiculous size of the luxury cruise ship was staggering to look at. "We are exactly 3 minutes out," Jamal said, flipping a heavy switch on the communication console. "I am overriding the local air traffic tower and declaring a VIP emergency landing right at the resort cabana pad. Put your laptop away, Natalie. It is time to go to work." I unbuckled my harness, gripping the cold handle of the door, completely ready to unleash absolute hell on their perfect paradise. The descent was sharp and incredibly fast. The heavy rotors of Jamal's corporate helicopter whipped the crystal-clear waters of Bimini into a chaotic frenzy as we dropped toward the private helipad attached to the luxury resort. Down below, I could see golf carts scattering and resort staff in white polo shirts running toward the landing zone, waving their arms in a frantic attempt to wave us off. Jamal completely ignored them. He set the massive aircraft down on the painted concrete circle with absolute precision. The engine whine began to wind down, but the heavy thud of the blades still vibrated through my chest. I grabbed my tote bag, making sure my laptop and the encrypted iPad were safely zipped inside. That bag held the financial guillotine I was about to drop on Gavin's neck. Jamal pushed the side door open and stepped out onto the tarmac first. He stood at 6'4", an imposing African-American man in tactical gear who moved with the kind of calculated authority that immediately made people stop and listen. I stepped out right behind him, the warm tropical air hitting me like a physical wall after the freezing chill of the Chicago night. We did not even make it 10 yards from the helicopter before we were intercepted. 3 local Port Authority officers and a frantic-looking resort manager in a linen suit sprinted up to us, blocking the path to the main promenade. "You cannot land here," the manager shouted over the slowing rotor blades, his face flushed with anger. "This is a restricted landing zone for pre-approved VIP guests only. You are violating Bahamian airspace. I need you to get back in that aircraft immediately, or I am calling the island police." Jamal did not slow his pace. He walked directly up to the manager, closing the distance so fast the man actually took a physical step backward. Jamal reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal his solid gold shield and federal credentials. He shoved it right into the manager's line of sight. "My name is Jamal Carter, former United States Marshal and current Director of International Security Operations for Vanguard Defense." Jamal stated, his voice a deep, unyielding baritone that commanded absolute obedience. "I am currently operating under federal jurisdiction, tracking a suspect involved in international wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. The suspect is currently sitting on your property. If you or your Port Authority officers attempt to obstruct my path, I will personally see to it that this entire resort is locked down as a crime scene for harboring a federal fugitive. Do you understand me?" The manager's eyes darted from the gold badge to Jamal's hard, unblinking stare. The local security officers immediately lowered their hands from their radios, clearly not wanting any part of an international federal incident. The manager swallowed hard, his arrogant demeanor instantly dissolving into pure panic. "Yes, sir," he stammered, stepping completely out of the way. "We do not want any trouble. We are not here to cause trouble for you," Jamal replied coldly, snapping his badge shut and putting it back in his jacket. "We are here to pick up the trash." Jamal gestured for me to follow, and we marched straight past the stunned security detail. We walked onto the main resort promenade, a meticulously landscaped pathway lined with towering palm trees and exotic blooming hibiscus. The contrast between my reality and this environment was nauseating. Just a few hours ago, I was listening to my 8-year-old daughter sobbing in a dark, empty house. Now I was walking past infinity pools filled with crystal-clear water and couples getting hot stone massages in open-air cabanas. Gavin had abandoned his family for this manufactured paradise, paying for it with stolen money. My grip on my tote bag tightened until my fingers ached. "Where exactly are they?" I asked Jamal, keeping my voice low and focused as we navigated through the sprawling property. Jamal checked the tracking application on his phone. "The Oasis of the Seas passengers have a private cordoned-off area on the north side of the beach. It is an exclusive VIP cabana section where they serve a private champagne breakfast for the highest-paying guests. That is where his digital footprint just pinged. We rounded a massive stone fountain and I finally saw it. The VIP section was separated from the rest of the resort by velvet ropes and towering floral arrangements. Waitstaff in crisp white uniforms were gliding between private cabanas carrying silver trays loaded with fresh seafood pastries and expensive bottles of champagne. Soft acoustic guitar music played from hidden speakers, creating an atmosphere of ultimate relaxation and extreme wealth. I stopped for a single second to take a deep breath. I smoothed down my blouse, fixed my posture, and locked my eyes on the entrance of the VIP enclosure. I was not a frantic abandoned wife. I was a professional investigator about to execute a raid. "Let us go ruin his vacation," I said. Jamal nodded, stepping aside to let me take the lead as we crossed the threshold into the most expensive breakfast of Gavin's life. The VIP breakfast enclosure smelled of expensive sunscreen, sea salt, and freshly baked croissants. We walked past several tables of wealthy vacationers dressed in designer resort wear. I scanned the area, my eyes moving methodically from cabana to cabana. It did not take long to find them. They had chosen a prime table right at the edge of the infinity pool, offering a perfect unobstructed view of the ocean. Gavin was wearing a crisp white linen shirt, unbuttoned halfway down his chest, leaning back in his chair with a smug, relaxed expression. He looked like a man who did not have a single care in the entire world. Sitting across from him was Sienna. She was wearing an oversized sun hat and a designer swimsuit that likely cost more than my first car. She had her phone mounted on a small tripod on the table, actively recording a live broadcast for her social media followers. As I walked closer, her high-pitched, overly enthusiastic voice carried over the soft background music. "Oh my God, you guys, I cannot even believe this!" She squealed into the camera, waving her hand to show off a massive, incredibly fake diamond ring. My amazing fiancé completely surprised me with this luxury getaway. We are in the royal suite on the oasis of the seas, and it is literally paradise. "Say hi to my followers, babe." Gavin chuckled, leaning forward to wave at the camera. He looked so incredibly pleased with himself. He was playing the role of the generous billionaire sugar daddy perfectly. He had carefully curated this entire fantasy, building it entirely on a foundation of lies and stolen funds. The utter delusion of it all made my stomach turn, but I pushed the disgust down, letting the cold, calculating anger take over completely. Jamal stepped to the side, positioning himself near the exit of the cabana to block any potential escape route and keep the resort security at bay. I did not break my stride. I walked directly into the frame of her live video broadcast, ensuring my face was perfectly visible to every single person watching her stream. Sienna looked up, her perfectly manicured eyebrows furrowing in confusion as a stranger invaded her shot. "Excuse me," she started to say, her influencer smile dropping instantly. "This is a private table. You need to back away right now." Gavin turned his head to see who she was talking to. The moment his eyes met mine, all the color completely drained from his face. His smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of absolute, unadulterated terror. The blood rushed out of his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly pale under the bright Bahamian sun. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of me standing in front of him. His mind could simply not process how the wife he had left in Chicago was currently ruining his island getaway. I did not say a single word to him. I did not scream or throw a tantrum. I simply reached out, picked up Sienna's crystal flute of vintage champagne from the table, and upended it directly over Gavin's lap. The ice-cold alcohol soaked instantly through his expensive white linen pants. He let out a pathetic, high-pitched gasp and jumped up, knocking his heavy wooden chair backward onto the deck with a loud, echoing crash. "Hey, are you crazy?" Sienna shrieked, scrambling to grab her phone as the tripod wobbled precariously. "Do you know how much that champagne costs? Security. Somebody get security over here right now." I ignored her completely. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and turned the volume up to the absolute maximum. I slammed the phone face up onto the center of their breakfast table, right next to their plates of lobster eggs Benedict. I pressed play on the audio file I had recorded in the taxi. Lily's terrified, hysterical voice ripped through the quiet luxury of the cabana area. "Mom, where are you? It is completely dark, and I am so scared. The lights went away a long time ago. Daddy never came back. I have been hiding under my blankets." The sound of an 8-year-old child sobbing in sheer terror completely shattered the peaceful atmosphere. Every single guest at the surrounding tables froze mid-bite. The waitstaff stopped dead in their tracks, lowering their silver trays. The soft acoustic guitar music suddenly seemed entirely inappropriate. The entire VIP section went completely silent, save for the agonizing sound of my daughter crying from the speaker of my phone. I let the recording play all the way to the end. When it finally clicked off, the silence that followed was incredibly heavy and absolutely deafening. I looked Gavin dead in the eye. His chest was heaving, his wet pants clinging to his legs, his billionaire persona completely destroyed in less than 60 seconds. The surrounding audience of wealthy vacationers were staring at him with undisguised disgust. I finally spoke, my voice loud, clear, and perfectly calm, carrying easily to the surrounding tables. "Hello, Gavin. I hope you are enjoying your $35,000 breakfast, because it is the absolute last meal you are ever going to eat using my money." Gavin stared at his soaked linen pants, his chest heaving as the shock finally wore off. The silence in the VIP cabana was suffocating, but Gavin was a man who survived his entire life by twisting the truth. He grabbed a cloth napkin from the table and furiously wiped at his legs, his face contorting from fear into blinding narcissistic rage. He could not handle looking weak or foolish in front of a crowd of millionaires. He needed to immediately regain control of the narrative. "You are completely out of your mind." Gavin spat, his voice rising loud enough to ensure every single person in the enclosure heard him play the victim. "You think you can just barge in here and embarrass me in public? This right here, this psychotic, controlling behavior is exactly why our marriage is completely dead." I did not flinch. I just let him yell, giving him enough rope to hang himself. "Do not stand there and pretend to be Mother of the Year," he shouted, stepping closer to me, but keeping a very safe distance from where Jamal was standing guard. "You are never home, Natalie. You spend 80 hours a week buried in your corporate audits and financial reports. You care more about finding missing pennies for your billionaire clients than you do about your own husband. You froze me out. You made me feel completely invisible and entirely useless in my own house. I am a man. I have needs." He gestured aggressively toward Sienna, who was busy trying to dry off her expensive phone with a napkin. "Sienna actually respects me," he continued, his voice dripping with misplaced self-righteousness. "She treats me like a man. She actually listens to me when I speak. You just look at me like I am a constant disappointment because I do not work on Wall Street. I deserve to be happy. I deserve a vacation from the miserable, cold, emasculating environment you created. You forced me to find comfort somewhere else." The sheer audacity of his words hung heavy in the tropical air. He was attempting to justify felony embezzlement and adultery by claiming I worked too hard. "And do not try to weaponize Lily against me," he yelled, pointing a trembling finger at my phone sitting on the table. I left her watching television with a fully stocked refrigerator and locked doors. How was I supposed to know a neighborhood transformer was going to blow and take out the power grid? She is 8 years old, not a toddler. She needs to learn how to be independent and self-sufficient. If you actually cared about her safety, you would have been home in Miami being a mother instead of sleeping in a hotel in Chicago. You abandoned her, Natalie, not me. I stood perfectly still. He was actually trying to convince a crowd of horrified strangers that leaving a child entirely alone overnight to fly to a different country with his mistress was a valuable lesson in independence. He was trying to blame me for his calculated decision to abandon our daughter and steal her tuition money. The surrounding guests began whispering among themselves, their expressions ranging from disbelief to utter disgust. Realizing that the crowd was not buying his ridiculous victim routine, Gavin decided to change tactics entirely. He needed authority on his side. He turned toward the resort staff who were hovering nervously near the edge of the cabana. "What are you all standing around staring at?" Gavin barked at them, snapping his fingers aggressively in the air. "I am a VIP guest on that cruise ship. I paid a premium to be on this private island. This woman does not belong here. She is a trespassing, estranged stalker who just physically assaulted me with a glass of champagne. I want the head of security here right this second. I want her arrested and removed from the property immediately." Two resort security guards cautiously stepped into the VIP area. They were the exact same guards Jamal had previously intimidated at the helipad. They looked incredibly hesitant, glancing nervously between Gavin's soaked pants and Jamal's massive, unmoving frame blocking the exit. Gavin saw the guards approaching, and his chest puffed out with arrogant confidence. He honestly thought he had completely won the encounter. "Put her in handcuffs right now," he demanded, pointing directly at my face. "Take her to the local police station, and take that massive thug with her. If you do not arrest her this very second, I will personally sue this resort and the cruise line for millions of dollars for failing to protect a high-paying guest." He turned back to me, a cruel, triumphant smirk returning to his face. "You made a huge mistake coming here, Natalie. You think you are so smart with your accounting spreadsheets and your data. But you are in a foreign country now. You have no power here. You are going to spend the next week rotting in a Bahamian jail cell while Sienna and I finish our luxury vacation." Gavin's threat hung in the air, a pathetic attempt to weaponize a foreign security force against his own wife. Before the guards could even process his demands, Sienna decided to insert herself back into the spotlight. Emboldened by Gavin's sudden burst of fake authority, she tossed her damp napkin onto the table and stood up, adjusting her designer swimsuit. She crossed her arms, looking me up and down with a sneer of absolute condescension. "Honestly, this is just sad," Sienna scoffed, rolling her eyes, as if my presence was nothing more than a minor inconvenience to her perfect morning. "You need to act your age and step aside with some dignity. Gavin does not love you anymore. He has not loved you for years. You are just embarrassing yourself by flying all the way down here like a desperate, obsessed ex-girlfriend. You cannot force a man to stay in a dead marriage just because you have a child together." I stared at her, marveling at the sheer audacity of a 25-year-old girl attempting to lecture me about dignity while sitting in a cabana paid for with stolen money. "And since we are putting everything out in the open," Sienna continued, her voice taking on a sickeningly sweet tone, "you should know that Gavin already spoke to a top family lawyer in Miami last week. He is filing for full custody of Lily as soon as we get back. He told the lawyer all about how you neglect her to work on your little spreadsheets. We are going to give Lily a real home, a happy home. So you might as well just get used to the idea of being alone." Hearing this girl casually use my daughter's name, claiming she was going to play mother to the child Gavin had literally abandoned in the dark just hours ago, ignited a fire inside me that was completely indescribable. I did not raise my voice. I did not blink. I just looked at Sienna with the kind of cold, calculating stare that reserved a special place for her in the absolute destruction I was about to unleash. Gavin saw my silence as a sign of defeat. He turned back to the two resort security guards who were still hesitating near the table. "I told you to remove her." He barked, his face red with frustration. "Grab her right now, or I am calling your corporate office to have you both fired before lunch." Pressured by the threat to their jobs and the angry demands of a wealthy VIP guest, the two guards finally stepped forward. The taller guard reached out and firmly grabbed my left bicep, while the second guard moved quickly to secure my right arm. Gavin's face immediately broke into a triumphant, arrogant smile. He actually thought it was over. He thought he had won. I did not struggle. I did not pull away. I simply stood my ground, knowing exactly what was about to happen next. Before the guards could even attempt to pull me backward, a massive shadow fell completely over the breakfast table. Jamal moved from his position at the cabana entrance with a terrifying explosive speed that completely defied his massive size. He did not shout. He did not ask them nicely to let me go. He simply reached out with his massive hands and clamped his fingers down on the wrists of both security guards simultaneously. Jamal applied a sudden vice-like pressure to their pressure points. Both guards let out a sharp gasp of pain, their grips on my arms releasing instantly, as their knees buckled slightly. Jamal smoothly stepped between me and the guards, turning his broad back to me, and facing them with a look of pure, unadulterated menace. "Let me explain exactly how this is going to work," Jamal said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous gravel that commanded absolute silence. "You are private resort employees, not Bahamian law enforcement. Under the United States and Bahamas extradition and mutual legal assistance treaties, you have zero legal authority to detain, physically restrain, or arrest an American citizen without the immediate presence of local police. By placing your hands on her, you just committed battery." The guards rubbed their wrists, taking several rapid steps backward, their eyes wide with fear. Jamal did not give them a second to recover. He took a slow, deliberate step toward them. Furthermore, Jamal continued his tone, cutting through the warm air like a razor blade. "I am an active director of a federal security contracting firm operating under international jurisdiction to monitor a suspect involved in a multi-million-dollar corporate felony. If either of you so much as breathe in this woman's direction again, I will personally place you under citizen's arrest under the Special Maritime Jurisdiction Act, zip tie you to these palm trees, and have my contacts at the Federal Bureau of Investigation add obstruction of justice to your permanent records. Do we have a clear understanding?" The two guards looked at Jamal, then looked at Gavin, and immediately made the smart choice. They were severely underpaid for this level of legal and physical threat. Without saying a single word, both guards turned around and quickly walked out of the VIP enclosure, abandoning Gavin entirely. Jamal slowly turned back around, crossing his massive arms over his chest. He looked down at Gavin, who was now trembling visibly in his soaked clothes. Jamal smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. "Your security detail just quit, Gavin," Jamal said softly. "Now I believe my sister-in-law has a few more things to say to you." Gavin stood completely paralyzed, the false bravado from just moments ago completely drained from his body. Jamal took a calculated step back, giving me an unobstructed view of my cowardly husband, but remaining close enough to block any sudden movements. I took a deep breath, preparing to reach into my tote bag and pull out the iPad, containing the financial evidence that would end his entire career. But before my fingers could even touch the zipper, a sound interrupted me. It was the heavy sliding glass door of the massive adjoining double cabana rolling open. A loud, familiar laugh cut through the tense, humid air. It was a laugh I had heard at countless Thanksgiving dinners and forced family gatherings over the past decade. Out stepped Richard and Diane, Gavin's parents. Diane was wearing a flowing, brightly colored silk caftan that billowed elegantly in the ocean breeze. She was holding a crystal flute filled with a perfectly chilled mimosa in one hand and a small silver tasting plate of beluga caviar in the other. Richard was walking right behind her, sporting a brand new linen fedora and a wildly expensive tropical Hawaiian shirt. He was chuckling heartily at something his wife had just said, completely oblivious to the absolute disaster waiting for them on the deck. "Oh, Gavin, darling, the spa down here is simply out of this world," Diane began to say, her voice dripping with extreme privilege. She finally lowered her gaze and looked up from her plate. Her voice trailed off into absolute nothingness. She stopped walking so abruptly that Richard bumped directly into her back. The silver plate slipped from her manicured fingers, hitting the expensive wooden deck with a sharp, echoing clatter. The tiny black pearls of imported caviar scattered across the floor, landing right next to Gavin's champagne-soaked shoes. I stared at them, my mind working furiously to process the visual information in front of me. My in-laws were here. They were on the private island in the Bahamas. They were part of the VIP cruise package. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit me like a physical punch to the chest. This was not just a secret, spontaneous romantic getaway for Gavin and his young mistress. This was a fully funded, elaborately planned family vacation. And I was the only family member not invited. They knew. Richard and Diane had always turned a blind eye to Gavin's flaws, always making excuses for his poor behavior, but this was an entirely different level of complicity. They had boarded that luxury cruise ship completely aware that I was freezing in Chicago, working a major corporate audit. They had packed their designer resort wear and boarded a flight to Miami completely aware that Sienna was coming along as their son's new partner. Worst of all, they knew that my 8-year-old daughter, their own flesh and blood granddaughter, was not on the passenger list. Natalie Diane finally managed to whisper. Her face turned an incredibly sickly shade of ash gray under her expensive sun hat. "What in the world are you doing here? What am I doing here, Diane?" I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper that commanded the attention of everyone in the enclosure. "I could ask you the exact same question." "Actually, no. I know exactly what you are doing here. You are enjoying a $35,000 luxury vacation." "Tell me, Richard, how is the caviar? Does it taste a little bit sweeter knowing it was paid for with your granddaughter's college tuition money?" Richard opened his mouth like a suffocating fish, looking desperately at his son for an explanation. Gavin refused to make eye contact with his father, staring firmly at the wooden deck. "You knew," I stated, taking a slow, deliberate step toward my in-laws. "You both knew about all of this. You knew he was sleeping with his 25-year-old assistant. You welcomed her on this trip. You sat at a table and drank champagne with the woman destroying your son's marriage. And you knew Lily was left completely alone in our house in Miami." "We did not know she was alone," Richard blurted out defensively. He held his hands up as if to physically shield himself from my anger. "Gavin told us you had arranged for an overnight nanny to stay at the house while you were in Chicago. We thought the child was perfectly safe." "A nanny?" I fired back, my voice echoing loudly off the canvas walls of the cabana. "You honestly believed he hired a nanny? Did you bother to call the house to check on her? Did you ask to video call your granddaughter before you got on a massive boat to eat seafood?" "No. You did not even care to verify if she was safe. You just wanted your free tropical trip." Diane quickly recovered from her initial shock. Her typical arrogant defense mechanisms kicked in immediately. She straightened her posture desperately, trying to salvage her wounded pride in front of the surrounding wealthy guests who were watching the entire scene unfold. She stepped carefully over the spilled caviar and glared directly at me, preparing to protect her precious son, just like she always did. "You are acting completely hysterical, Natalie," Diane hissed, smoothing the front of her silk caftan. She raised her chin, looking at me in that familiar condescending way she always used when her family's image was threatened. "You barging in here like a lunatic proves exactly what Gavin has been telling us for months. You forced him into this situation." I stared back at her. "I deliberately forced him to abandon his child and drain her bank account," I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "You left him with no choice." Diane snapped, her volume rising to control the narrative. "A marriage requires a woman who is present. You were never a real wife. You stripped him of his role as the provider. You completely ruined his masculinity with your relentless obsession with climbing the corporate ladder. You work 80 hours a week making more money than him just to humiliate him. What man wants to come home to a cold, calculating woman who makes him feel utterly inadequate?" She gestured dramatically towards Sienna, who was still hiding behind Gavin. He had to look elsewhere just to feel like a man again. He needed someone warm, someone who respects him and appreciates his hard work. The sheer hypocrisy of her words hung in the humid air. She was standing on a private island eating caviar funded by a stolen college fund, and trying to blame my professional success for her son's profound moral bankruptcy. I let her finish her ridiculous theatrical speech. Then I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that echoed across the quiet cabana. It was not a happy sound. "My masculinity-ruining career, Diane?" I asked, taking a slow, deliberate step forward until I was looking directly down into my mother-in-law's perfectly contoured face. Is that really what we are calling it today? Because it seems you have very conveniently forgotten exactly what my career has done for this family. I shifted my cold gaze from Diane to Richard. Richard flinched, his eyes darting wildly. He knew exactly what was coming. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like he was about to pass out on the wooden deck. "Natalie, please do not say anything," Richard pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whisper. "Let us talk about my career," I announced loudly, making absolutely sure my voice carried to the back rows of the VIP section, where the wealthiest guests were hanging on to every single word. "3 years ago, Richard, you made some incredibly poor decisions. Do you want to explain to your lovely wife and all these strangers why you were secretly crying at my kitchen table at 3 in the morning?" Richard looked at the ground, unable to speak. I did not wait for him to find his courage. Richard had a severe gambling problem, I declared, watching the shock ripple through the crowd. He owed $150,000 to an illegal sports betting syndicate. They were making violent threats against him. Worse, the Internal Revenue Service was preparing an indictment for federal tax evasion because he had been desperately trying to hide his massive gambling losses through his failing hardware business. He was terrified. He was facing federal prison. Diane turned slowly to look at her husband, her mouth hanging open in complete shock. Richard had clearly never told her a single word about his secret life. "Gavin did not have the money to save you," I continued, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Gavin was too busy leasing luxury sports cars to maintain his own fake image. So who saved you, Richard? It was not your son. It was me. I used my annual corporate bonus, the exact same money from the career Diane just insulted, to pay off every single penny of that illicit debt to keep your legs from being broken." I stepped even closer, my voice dropping to a lethal, icy tone. "Then, I spent 2 straight weeks using my forensic accounting skills to legally restructure your fraudulent tax returns so you would not spend your retirement wearing a federal prison jumpsuit. I kept your dirty secret from everyone, including your own wife, to protect this family's precious reputation." Diane looked like she had been struck by lightning. She stared at Richard, who was now trembling and refusing to meet her eyes. "So do not you ever dare stand there in your designer resort wear, sipping champagne paid for with my daughter's stolen money, and lecture me about how my ambition destroyed your son's fragile ego. The only reason your husband is standing on this beautiful island right now, instead of sitting in a cold, dark, maximum security prison cell, is simply and entirely because of my spreadsheets." The silence that followed my revelation was absolute. Diane stood completely frozen, her mouth slightly open, unable to formulate a single word of defense. Richard looked like he wanted the wooden deck to open up and swallow him whole. He refused to look at his wife, confirming everything I had just said was the absolute truth. The wealthy guests in the surrounding cabanas were no longer just casually listening. They were completely captivated, their breakfast plates pushed aside as they watched the immaculate facade of Gavin's family crumble to pieces. Gavin could not handle it. The sight of his parents being publicly humiliated and his own fabricated narrative falling apart pushed him completely over the edge. His face turned a deep, angry crimson. He stepped away from Sienna and marched toward me, stopping just inches from where Jamal stood like an immovable stone wall. "You are completely unhinged," Gavin screamed, the veins in his neck bulging against his soaked skin. He turned his head, projecting his voice to the crowd. "She is a pathological liar and a completely unstable woman. Do not listen to a single word she says." I did not raise my voice to match his. I simply watched him flail. "You can call me whatever you want, Gavin," I replied smoothly. "But numbers absolutely never lie." "Oh, you want to talk about numbers?" Gavin barked, laughing maniacally. "Let us talk about numbers, Natalie. Let us talk about the fact that I am officially done with you. I am divorcing you. I am filing the papers the second I land in Miami. I am hiring the most aggressive, ruthless family attorney in the entire state of Florida, and I am going to take absolutely everything." He puffed his chest out desperately, trying to reclaim his alpha male persona. You think you are so smart with your little audits and your spreadsheets? He sneered, pointing a finger at me. But you forget who actually brings in the real money. I am a vice president of regional sales for one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. I generate millions of dollars in revenue every single quarter. You are just a glorified human calculator who counts the money real men make. Sienna, sensing a shift in the momentum, stepped up right behind Gavin and placed a manicured hand on his shoulder, nodding in agreement. She looked incredibly smug, clearly believing she had just secured a very wealthy, powerful man who was about to win a massive divorce settlement. I am taking the house in Miami, Gavin announced proudly, making sure the audience heard every single word of his grand plan. I paid the mortgage on that beautiful 4-bedroom property, and I am going to keep it. I am taking the cars, including that luxury sport utility vehicle you love driving so much. I am taking the primary bank accounts. I am going to leave you with absolutely nothing but your cheap business suits and your miserable, lonely career. He took a deep breath, looking around at the crowd, as if expecting them to applaud his firm stance. You came all the way to the Bahamas to embarrass me, but all you did was give me the perfect excuse to finally cut you off. You are going to be living in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment while Sienna and I raise Lily in the house I paid for. I am going to make sure the judge knows exactly how crazy you are. The sheer level of delusion was almost fascinating to witness. Gavin actually believed his own lies. He had spent so many years lying to his parents, lying to his clients, and lying to his mistress that he had completely lost touch with reality. He honestly thought his pharmaceutical salary made him untouchable, completely ignoring the fact that his lifestyle was heavily subsidized by fraud and my careful financial management. I looked at him, feeling absolutely no anger anymore. The initial rage from the 2 o'clock phone call had entirely burned out, leaving nothing but cold surgical precision. I felt only a deep, profound pity for the pathetic man standing in front of me. He was boasting about keeping a house he had legally signed away. He was bragging about generating revenue for a company he had been actively robbing. He was threatening me with aggressive lawyers using money he did not actually have. He thought this was a traditional domestic dispute, where whoever screamed the loudest won the argument. He did not realize I had already dismantled his entire life while I was sitting in the back of a taxicab in Chicago. Are you quite finished? I asked, my voice cutting easily through his heavy breathing. Because if you are done listing all the things you think you own, I have a few documents I would love to show you. Richard suddenly found his voice. Humiliated by my brutal exposure of his criminal gambling debts, he decided the best defense was a vicious, calculated offense. He stepped out from behind his stunned wife, his face flushed with desperate anger, and pointed a trembling finger right at my face. You can waive all the financial papers you want. Richard stammered, his voice shaking, but growing louder as he tried to rally his courage. Money does not make you a fit mother. You abandoned your own daughter. You left the state of Florida. You flew all the way to Chicago and left an 8-year-old child entirely alone in a dark house. I stared at him, genuinely astounded by the sheer cognitive dissonance required to make that statement out loud. Gavin was the one at home, Richard. I replied, keeping my voice dangerously level. He was the parent in charge. He was supposed to be watching her. He had a severe medical emergency. Diane chimed in, lying through her teeth without missing a single beat. She moved to stand shoulder to shoulder with her husband. He needed a mental health break from your constant emotional abuse. But you chose to leave. You chose your corporate audit over your own family. If you try to take everything from my son in a divorce, we will call Child Protective Services this very second. Richard nodded vigorously, completely embracing this absurd manufactured narrative. We will call them right now, Natalie. We will file a formal state report. We will tell the social workers exactly what kind of negligent absentee mother you truly are. We will testify in family court under oath that you are a physical danger to that child. Gavin will get full, undivided custody, and you will get limited supervised visitation if you are incredibly lucky. Sienna, smelling blood in the water, stepped out from behind Gavin. I will be a much better mother to her anyway, she sneered, examining her manicured nails. I actually have the time to raise a child properly, instead of sitting in hotel rooms staring at a computer screen. Gavin's smug smirk completely returned. He crossed his arms over his wet linen shirt, looking like a man who had just been handed a winning lottery ticket. You hear that? He gloated, his chest puffing out again. My parents are my witnesses. You are not just fighting me anymore, Natalie. You are fighting the entire family. And the court system does not look kindly on mothers who abandon their kids to go on business trips while their husbands are having medical crises. They were actually doing it. They were standing in the middle of a luxury tropical cabana, a vacation paid for entirely with my daughter's stolen future, threatening to weaponize the legal system against me. They wanted to rip my child away from me, just to protect a narcissistic embezzler and his social media-obsessed mistress. Up until this exact moment, I had maintained a sliver of professional restraint. I had planned to simply expose the financial fraud, freeze the joint accounts, and walk away clean. But the moment Richard threatened to call Child Protective Services, the moment Diane agreed to commit perjury in family court to steal my daughter, the final remaining thread of my patience completely snapped. The gloves were no longer just coming off. They were being entirely incinerated. I looked over at Jamal. He caught my eye and gave a slow, grim nod. He knew exactly what that kind of threat meant to a mother. He took a heavy half-step forward, his massive frame radiating pure concentrated intimidation. "Let me save you the trouble of dialing the phone," Richard Jamal said, his deep voice slicing through the warm tropical air like a machete. "Because I already filed an official police report with the Miami Police Department at 2:15 this morning. The responding officers documented the abandoned house, the tripped electrical breaker, and the fake sticky note your son left on the kitchen counter before he boarded a luxury cruise ship. There is already a highly detailed official paper trail, and it points directly at Gavin." Furthermore, Jamal continued, taking another slow step toward the trembling older man. "Filing a false report with Child Protective Services in the state of Florida is a third-degree felony. If you so much as utter my niece's name to a state worker, I will personally ensure you are indicted for perjury and conspiracy. And unlike last time, nobody is going to pay your legal bills to keep you out of a federal cell." Gavin's smirk faltered slightly, but he pressed on, blinded by his own desperate panic. "It does not matter," Gavin barked. "We have money. We will hire expert witnesses. We will drag this out and bury her in legal fees until she completely surrenders custody." "You do not have money, Gavin," I said, my voice dropping so low and sharp that several people at the surrounding VIP tables actually leaned in to hear me. "You do not have a single dime that I did not allow you to have. You want to drag my family into a courtroom. You want to bring the legal system into this breakfast. That is absolutely perfect. Because I brought the legal system right here to you." I turned my back on them and walked straight over to the massive outdoor television screen mounted on the stone wall of the VIP lounge. It was currently displaying a colorful slideshow of tropical drinks and spa packages. I reached into my heavy tote bag and pulled out my encrypted corporate iPad. I did not need to scream or make baseless threats like them. I had hard, undeniable data. Jamal immediately moved to the wall panel, popping open the media console. He pulled out a high-definition video cable and tossed the end to me. I plugged it directly into my device. "Gavin wants to talk about who makes the real money," I announced loudly, turning to face my husband, my hypocritical in-laws, and the completely captivated audience of wealthy vacationers. "He wants to talk about how he paid for this beautiful vacation. Let us show everyone exactly how a vice president of sales affords a $35,000 weekend." The 75-inch high-definition screen flickered for a brief second before mirroring my device display. The bright, cheerful tropical images of the resort advertising were instantly replaced by the sterile black-and-white interface of a premier banking portal. The sheer size of the television made the numbers absolutely impossible to miss, even for the vacationing guests sitting at the furthest tables near the infinity pool. I tapped the screen of my tablet, maximizing the financial dashboard window. "This is our joint financial dashboard," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the completely silent cabana. As you can see by the names listed at the top right corner, this belongs to Gavin and myself. Gavin just stood here and proudly claimed that he pays the mortgage, that he buys the luxury cars, and that he single-handedly funds this lavish lifestyle. Let us look at the actual reality. I opened the primary checking account on the screen. The current balance is less than $2,000. I moved my finger and clicked on the joint savings account. It is entirely drained to the minimum requirement. Gavin lives paycheck to paycheck, spending every single dime he earns on leased sports cars, expensive watches, and tailored suits just to maintain a wealthy facade. I paused, letting the pathetic numbers sink into the minds of the audience. But yesterday morning, Gavin desperately needed $35,000 in liquid cash to book the royal suite on the Oasis of the Seas. He needed to impress his young assistant and play the role of a generous billionaire. So, where does a man with zero savings suddenly get $35,000 on a random Thursday morning? I navigated back to the main menu. I hovered my finger over a specific account folder. He gets it from his 8-year-old daughter. I firmly tapped the folder labeled Lilly University Fund. The screen refreshed. The transaction history populated the massive display in bold red numbers. I pointed directly at the largest line item on the screen. This is a custodial college savings account. It took me 8 straight years of strict budgeting and allocating my corporate bonuses to build this fund up to $45,000. I want everyone here to look very closely at the timestamp projected on the wall. I highlighted the specific transaction. Yesterday morning at exactly 9:15, a withdrawal of $40,000 was executed from this account. The cash was transferred directly into Gavin's private checking account. I quickly swiped my screen to a different document, bringing up a digital receipt from the cruise line. And at exactly 9:20, just 5 short minutes later, Gavin's private credit card was charged $35,000 for a luxury cruise suite. He deliberately stole his own child's future to pay for a tropical affair. A collective audible gasp rippled through the VIP enclosure. These were wealthy people, many of them successful parents and grandparents who understood the sacred duty of protecting a child's future. The initial curiosity of the crowd instantly soured into pure visceral disgust. An older gentleman sitting 2 tables away slammed his heavy coffee cup down onto his saucer. "That is absolutely despicable," the man said loudly, not caring who heard him. A woman sitting next to him shook her head, staring at Gavin with absolute contempt. The murmurs quickly grew into outright boos. People were actively jeering at him. Gavin's face went completely pale. The reality of his public execution was finally setting in. "Turn that off!" he yelled, his voice cracking in sheer panic. He lunged toward the media console mounted on the stone wall, desperately reaching for the video cable to unplug my device. Jamal simply stepped right into his path, crossing his massive arms and giving Gavin a dark look that promised instant physical trauma if he took one more step. Gavin froze, trapped between a furious former federal agent and an incredibly angry mob of millionaires. Sienna looked up at the screen, her eyes wide with horror. She had been bragging to her internet followers about her wealthy fiancé, but the simple math on the wall proved she was sleeping with a broke, desperate thief. She took a physical step away from Gavin, desperately trying to distance herself from the humiliation. I turned to look at Richard and Diane. They were completely silent now. The arrogant threat of calling Child Protective Services had completely vanished from their lips. You can defend a cheating son, but you cannot defend a man who robs his own 8-year-old daughter in broad daylight. Diane pressed her manicured hand over her mouth, her eyes fixed on the massive red numbers on the screen. The perfect family name she fought so incredibly hard to protect was now permanently synonymous with thievery. "He took everything from her," I said, my voice relentless and cold. "He left her sitting alone in the dark, and he stole her education." But if you think stealing from a child is the worst thing Gavin did this week, you severely underestimate his greed. I closed the banking portal and opened a secure encrypted folder on my desktop. It was time to bring out the corporate records. I tapped the screen of my tablet, opening the heavily encrypted folder I had compiled during my helicopter flight. The massive television screen on the stone wall shifted instantly. The red numbers of Lily's drained college fund disappeared, replaced by dense, highly detailed corporate financial spreadsheets. Hundreds of rows of data payment ledgers and vendor invoices illuminated the cabana. The sheer volume of information projected on the screen was overwhelming to the naked eye. But to a forensic accountant, it was a perfectly painted picture of grand larceny. "Gavin, you stood here just a few minutes ago and called me a glorified human calculator," I said, pacing slowly in front of the screen so everyone could hear me clearly. "You boasted about how you bring in the real money for your pharmaceutical company. You claimed your massive salary is what funds your expensive suits and leased sports cars. But the truth is, your salary barely covers your massive credit card debt. You are not a successful businessman. You are just a common thief wearing a very expensive linen shirt." I swiped my finger across my tablet, isolating a specific section of the corporate ledger. The screen zoomed in on the regional marketing budget for Gavin's department. As a vice president of sales, Gavin was given executive control over a multi-million-dollar promotional budget. It was supposed to be used for medical conferences, client dinners, and legitimate advertising campaigns. I looked directly at the crowd of wealthy vacationers. Many of them were corporate executives themselves, and I could see the recognition dawning on their faces. They knew exactly how easily discretionary budgets could be abused. "If you want to steal from a massive corporation, the marketing department is the absolute easiest place to hide the bodies," I explained calmly. "You create fake expenses, you approve them yourself, and you hope the internal auditors are too busy to notice." Unfortunately for Gavin, his wife is an external auditor who specializes in finding missing corporate funds. During my flight here, I decided to take a very close look at his department's expense reports. I tapped the screen again, pulling up a series of 12 separate digital invoices. They were all billed from a company called Apex Digital Media. "Look at these invoices," I commanded, pointing at the massive display. $75,000 for a regional social media push, $80,000 for digital brand management, $110,000 for consulting fees. Over the last 4 months, Gavin personally approved 12 separate payments to this single vendor. I highlighted the bottom line of the spreadsheet. The grand total of those 12 invoices was exactly $1.2 million. Gavin was no longer just pale. He looked physically ill. He stumbled backward, his soaked pants sticking to his legs until he hit the edge of a heavy wooden cabana chair. He gripped the back of it, his knuckles turning completely white. "That is privileged corporate information," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "You hacked into my company network. That is illegal. Those are legitimate marketing expenses." "Legitimate marketing expenses?" I repeated, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Gavin, you really should have paid more attention when I talked about my job at the dinner table. You bypassed the secondary executive approval process by keeping every single invoice just a few $1,000s under the mandatory corporate review threshold. That is not legitimate business. That is calculated, premeditated fraud." I swiped to the next document. It was a digital copy of the routing numbers attached to the corporate wire transfers. When a legitimate pharmaceutical company pays a marketing agency, the money goes to a domestic commercial bank. But this money did not stay in the United States. I traced the routing numbers attached to every single one of those 12 invoices. The $1.2 million was wired directly into an offshore holding account located in the Cayman Islands. The silence in the VIP enclosure was so absolute that the only sound was the gentle lapping of the ocean water against the infinity pool. The crowd was completely mesmerized by the sheer scale of the crime being dissected in front of them. This was no longer just a messy domestic dispute about a cheating husband. This was a massive corporate crime playing out live over breakfast. "You did not just steal $40,000 from your daughter," I said, my voice dropping into a deadly serious tone. "You systematically embezzled $1.2 million from your employer. You committed multiple counts of felony wire fraud and international money laundering. You crossed state lines and international borders using stolen corporate funds. Family court is the absolute least of your problems right now, Gavin. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is going to freeze every single asset attached to your name, and you are going to spend the next decade in a federal penitentiary. I let the heavy reality of his impending prison sentence hang in the air for a long moment. Then I turned my gaze slowly towards Sienna, who was trembling violently near the edge of the table. But the most interesting part of this entire investigation was not the stolen money. It was discovering exactly who owned that offshore bank account. I turned my body away from my husband and locked my eyes completely on Sienna. Up until this exact moment, she had been hiding behind Gavin, treating this entire confrontation like an annoying interruption to her perfect influencer aesthetic. But as the sheer gravity of the words federal penitentiary finally registered in her mind, her arrogant facade completely shattered. She was trembling so violently that her expensive sunglasses slipped down the bridge of her nose. I reached out and tapped my tablet one more time. The massive screen on the stone wall shifted away from the spreadsheets and displayed a scanned official legal document. It bore the seal of the Cayman Islands Corporate Registry. When you steal over $1 million, you cannot simply deposit it into a local checking account, I explained to the completely silent crowd, though my eyes never left Sienna. You have to clean it. You have to create a fake corporate entity, a shell company, to act as the recipient of those fraudulent vendor invoices. I looked back at the screen and pointed at the bold black text at the very top of the document. The company Gavin used to siphon the money is called Apex Digital Media. I took a slow step toward the young woman standing frozen by the breakfast table. But Gavin could not register this offshore company in his own name. That would immediately trigger an internal compliance audit at his pharmaceutical firm. He needed a proxy. He needed someone completely detached from the medical industry to act as the registered agent and sole proprietor of the shell company. He needed a money mule. I pointed at the bottom of the projected document. Right next to the official corporate seal was a perfectly legible, heavily stylized signature. It was the exact same signature Sienna used on her social media posts. Sienna, I said, my voice ringing out with absolute clarity. Would you like to explain to everyone here why your legal name and signature are on the Articles of Incorporation for a fraudulent offshore holding company containing $1.2 million of stolen corporate funds? Sienna let out a sharp gasp, taking another panicked step backward until her back hit the wooden railing of the cabana. No, she stammered, shaking her head wildly. No, that is not what that is. Gavin told me that was just paperwork for a brand sponsorship. He said his company wanted to sponsor my social media page to promote health and wellness products. He said I needed a limited liability company for tax purposes. I did not do anything illegal. She looked frantically around the VIP enclosure, desperately seeking sympathy from the wealthy guests, but they only stared back at her with hardened, judgmental expressions. She turned to Gavin, her voice pitching up into a hysterical shriek. Tell them, Gavin. Tell her I did not know about the stolen money. Tell her you just asked me to sign the papers and I did what you said. Gavin completely ignored her. He was staring at the floor, breathing heavily, entirely consumed by his own impending destruction. He was not going to save her. He was already trying to figure out how to use her as a convenient scapegoat for the federal investigators. Ignorance of the law does not grant you immunity from it, Sienna, I stated coldly, cutting off her hysterical rambling. You did not just sign a piece of paper. You actively opened the offshore accounts. You received 12 separate wire transfers. You allowed stolen corporate funds to flow directly through a company registered entirely in your name. In the eyes of the federal government, you are not just a naive assistant or a foolish mistress. You are an official accomplice to felony wire fraud and international money laundering. Tears finally spilled over her perfectly applied makeup, leaving dark streaks of mascara running down her cheeks. But I did not spend a dime of that money, she cried out, pointing an accusing finger at Gavin. He kept the bank cards. He controlled the offshore accounts. I swear I did not touch it. I looked down at the designer swimsuit she was wearing. I looked at the massive, expensive diamond ring on her finger. I looked at the $35,000 luxury cruise suite she was currently enjoying. "You are wearing the money, Sienna," I replied, my tone devoid of any sympathy. "Everything he bought you over the last 4 months was purchased with stolen funds. Do you know what the government does when they uncover a money laundering operation? They execute immediate civil asset forfeiture. That fake diamond ring, those expensive designer bags, your car, everything will be seized by federal agents the moment you step foot back on American soil." Sienna collapsed into one of the wooden cabana chairs, burying her face in her hands and sobbing loudly. Her grand delusion of marrying a wealthy executive and living a life of absolute luxury had just evaporated in front of her eyes. She was 25 years old, and she was about to face decades in federal prison for a man who used her as a human shield for his own corporate greed. The alliance between the two cheaters was officially broken, leaving them both completely isolated in their own massive, terrifying reality. Sienna was sobbing uncontrollably, her face buried in her hands. Gavin stood completely frozen, staring at his former mistress as she loudly cursed his name and blamed him for her impending federal prison sentence. The wealthy crowd watched the absolute destruction of their partnership with grim fascination. But Diane was not finished. Diane had spent her entire life clinging to material wealth and social status, and she absolutely refused to let me walk away with the upper hand. She stepped forward, her silk caftan rustling aggressively, and pointed a manicured finger at me. "You think you have completely ruined him?" Diane shrieked, her voice cracking with desperate, uncontrollable rage. "You think showing these corporate records changes the law? It does not matter what he did at his office. You are still legally married. That means he is entitled to exactly 50% of everything you have built together. He still owns half of that beautiful 4-bedroom house in Miami. When he files for divorce, the judge will force you to sell it and cut him a massive check. He will have plenty of money to hire the best defense attorney in the state." Gavin snapped his head up. A sudden glimmer of hope washed over his pale, sweating face. His mother was right. The equity in our Miami house was substantial. Property values in our neighborhood had skyrocketed over the last 5 years. He wiped a drop of sweat from his forehead, desperately attempting to reconstruct his shattered ego. "That is exactly right," Gavin muttered, stepping away from Sienna and moving closer to his parents for support. "I am on the deed. It is marital property. You cannot just kick me out onto the street. I will force a partition sale and take my half in cash." I did not even bother looking at Gavin. I kept my eyes locked directly on Diane, watching the desperate, greedy hope clinging to her features. "Diane," I said, my voice dangerously soft, "you really should stop giving your son legal advice. It is exactly how your husband ended up owing $150,000 to illegal bookies." I turned my back to them and reached for my tablet. I tapped the screen twice. The Cayman Islands registry document vanished from the massive television display. It was instantly replaced by a highly detailed legal contract bearing the official seal of the Miami-Dade County Records Office. I highlighted the title of the document in bright yellow. It was a formal post-nuptial agreement, accompanied by a legally recorded quiet title deed. "Let us take a quick trip down memory lane to 2 years ago," I announced to the silent cabana. Gavin loves to drive fast in his expensive leased sports cars. But 2 years ago, he ran a red light while answering a text message and caused a massive 4-car collision. He severely injured a young man. The victim hired a very aggressive personal injury attorney who filed a multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit against Gavin. Gavin flinched, clearly remembering the absolute panic of that specific lawsuit. He had come home crying like a child, terrified that the victim's lawyers were going to seize all of our assets, including our primary residence, to satisfy a massive court judgment. He was absolutely terrified of losing his precious lifestyle. I continued pointing at the massive screen. "So I offered him a perfectly legal solution to shield our primary asset from the impending civil judgment. I drafted a post-nuptial agreement. This legally binding document transferred 100% of the equity ownership and title of our Miami home exclusively into my name. It legally separated the house from his personal liability. I swiped down to the final page of the document on the screen. Gavin's signature was displayed in massive black ink right next to the official stamp of a public notary. He signed it without a single second of hesitation, just to save his own skin, I stated coldly. He thought it was just a temporary protective measure until the lawsuit blew over. But legal contracts do not care about your assumptions. This deed was filed and recorded permanently with the county clerk. I turned back to face my husband. Gavin, you do not own 50% of that house. You do not own 10% of that house. You own absolutely nothing. Your name is entirely removed from the property deed. It is not considered marital property subject to division. It is my sole separate asset. You cannot force a sale, and you certainly are not getting a single dime of equity to pay for your federal criminal defense attorney. The glimmer of hope completely vanished from Gavin's face, replaced by a look of sheer suffocating dread. His mother let out a loud gasp, pressing both hands against her chest as if she was experiencing a physical heart attack. Richard stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish pulled out of the water. You are effectively homeless, Gavin. I finalized my words, echoing like a gavel striking wood. You abandoned your daughter, you robbed her college fund, and you stole millions from your employer. Now you have absolutely no money, no leverage, and no place to live. Gavin stared at the massive screen projecting his absolute ruin. The finality of the quiet title deed broke something deep inside his mind. He was a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of control, wealth, and superiority. In less than 20 minutes, I had systematically stripped away his money, his career, his mistress, and his home. He had no clever lies left to spin. He had no manipulative tactics left to deploy. There was only the raw, suffocating reality of his complete destruction. A low, guttural sound clawed its way up his throat. It was not a word. It was a primal noise of pure, unadulterated rage, born from absolute humiliation. The veins in his neck pulsed violently against his skin. His fists clenched so tightly, his knuckles turned completely white. He did not care about the wealthy vacationers watching him. He did not care about his parents standing frozen in shock. He only saw me standing perfectly calm with my tablet in hand, dismantling his entire existence. You did this to me, Gavin screamed, his voice cracking into a frantic, high-pitched roar. Without another second of hesitation, he lunged forward. He cleared the space between us with surprising speed, his hands reaching out violently toward my throat. He wanted to physically tear the truth away from me. He wanted to inflict the same agonizing pain he was feeling in his shattered ego. I did not take a single step backward. I did not raise my hands to protect myself. I did not even blink. I knew exactly who was standing right beside me. Before Gavin could even cross half the distance, Jamal moved. It was a terrifying display of explosive physical power and decades of tactical training. Jamal did not throw a wild punch or engage in a messy brawl. He intercepted my husband with the cold, calculated precision of a former federal agent neutralizing an active threat. Jamal stepped effortlessly in front of me, his massive shoulder driving directly into Gavin's chest. The impact sounded like a heavy sack of concrete hitting the floor. The breath was violently knocked out of Gavin's lungs in a loud, wheezing gasp. Jamal fluidly grabbed Gavin's extended right arm, twisted the wrist outward, and applied a brutal professional joint lock. Using Gavin's own forward momentum against him, Jamal swept his leg and drove my husband face first into the hard wooden deck of the cabana. The heavy thud of Gavin's body hitting the floor echoed loudly across the infinity pool. Jamal immediately dropped his heavy knee squarely between Gavin's shoulder blades, pinning him entirely to the ground. He wrenched the locked arm up just far enough to cause excruciating pain without actually snapping the bone. Gavin let out a sharp, agonizing cry, his face pressed directly into the damp wood right next to the spilled caviar. He thrashed his legs wildly, trying desperately to break free, but Jamal was an immovable mountain of muscle and federal training. The struggle was over in less than 3 seconds. Diane let out a piercing shriek, taking a step forward as if she was going to physically attack Jamal. Richard immediately grabbed his wife by the arm, violently pulling her back. He knew better. He knew that interfering with a trained security operative actively restraining a violent attacker would only end with both of them in handcuffs. Sienna backed away slowly, pressing her hands against her mouth in absolute terror, wanting absolutely no part of the physical violence. Jamal did not even look at Diane. He kept his knee planted firmly on Gavin's back, his breathing completely even and relaxed as if he had just taken a casual stroll down the beach. He looked up at the horrified crowd of wealthy vacationers. Almost every single person at the surrounding tables had pulled out their smartphones. The red recording lights blinked aggressively from every direction. Gavin was not just losing his freedom, he was becoming a viral spectacle of failure. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the sudden disturbance to your beautiful morning," Jamal announced, his deep baritone voice carrying easily over the soft ocean breeze. He spoke with the calm authority of a man reading a daily menu. "For anyone who might be wondering, what you just witnessed is the textbook definition of attempted assault and battery." Jamal leaned down, pressing his knee just a fraction of an inch harder into Gavin's spine. Gavin let out another pathetic whimper. "You really are not very good at thinking things through, Gavin," Jamal whispered, though the entire enclosure could still hear him. "You are already facing decades in a federal penitentiary for corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and international money laundering. You are currently under investigation for child abandonment by the Miami Police Department, and now you just committed a violent felony in front of 50 wealthy witnesses holding high-definition cameras." Jamal looked over his shoulder at me, giving me a brief approving nod. "Add aggravated assault to the rapidly growing list of charges," he said smoothly. I stepped forward, looking directly down at the pathetic, soaked man writhing on the floor. Gavin was crying now. Genuine tears of pain and absolute defeat streamed down his face, mixing with the salt water on the deck. His designer linen outfit was ruined. His reputation was entirely annihilated. The alpha male executive persona was completely gone, leaving nothing but a broken, cowardly thief pinned to the ground. I reached down and picked up my phone from the table, sliding it carefully into my tote bag next to my tablet. "You wanted to play a high-stakes game with our family, Gavin," I said coldly. "You went all in with stolen money. But you completely forgot the absolute most important rule. You never bet against the house." Gavin remained pinned against the damp wooden deck, his face turned sideways and his cheek pressing into the scattered black caviar. Jamal did not move an inch, his heavy knee anchoring my husband to the floor. The physical threat was completely neutralized, but I was not entirely finished. Physical restraint was only a temporary measure. I needed to ensure that his professional destruction was absolute and irreversible. I unlocked the screen of my phone and opened my contact list. The wealthy vacationers in the cabana watched in absolute silence, their phones still recording every single second of the spectacle. Diane and Richard stood completely paralyzed by the railing, finally realizing that their son had dragged their entire family name into an inescapable abyss. I scrolled past the names of my friends and family until I found the exact contact I needed. "Gavin loves to talk about his corporate status," I announced to the crowd, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "He loves to brag about his executive title and his corner office. But a title is only given by those who have the power to take it away." I pressed the dial button and immediately engaged the speakerphone function, holding the device up so the audio would carry across the quiet enclosure. The phone rang exactly one time before the line clicked open. There was no polite corporate greeting. There was no pleasant exchange of morning pleasantries. A deep, furiously harsh voice immediately barked through the speaker. "Natalie," the voice demanded. "Tell me you have him secured." "I have him, Mr. Preston," I replied smoothly. "He is currently pinned to the floor of a cabana in the Bahamas, listening to every single word you are saying." I looked down at Gavin. At the sound of his chief executive officer's voice, Gavin actually stopped thrashing. His eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated panic. He tried to lift his head, but Jamal simply applied a fraction more pressure to his spine, keeping him firmly planted on the deck. For those wondering, I said, addressing the captivated audience, the man on the phone is Mr. Preston. He is the chief executive officer of the pharmaceutical company where Gavin is currently employed. When I was sitting in the back of my brother-in-law's helicopter a few hours ago, I did not just save those fraudulent invoices to my private tablet. I compiled a comprehensive, fully annotated forensic audit report. I attached every single fake vendor payment, the offshore shell company registration, and the corresponding banking timestamps. Then I emailed that entire package directly to Mr. Preston and the executive board of directors. There was a heavy sigh on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of shuffling papers. "I received your email at 5 o'clock this morning," Natalie Preston said, his voice vibrating with barely contained corporate rage. I immediately woke up our general counsel and convened an emergency board meeting at 6. We have spent the last 2 hours reviewing the financial forensics you provided. The evidence of grand larceny and wire fraud is absolutely undeniable. Preston paused, and when he spoke again, his tone was directed entirely at the pathetic man lying on the wooden deck. "Gavin, if you can hear me, you are an absolute disgrace," Preston snarled. "You used my company to fund your pathetic vanity. You abused your executive privileges, violated your fiduciary duties, and stole millions of dollars from the marketing budget to pay your mistress. You actually thought you were smarter than our entire compliance department. You were wrong." Gavin let out a muffled, desperate sob. "Please," he choked out, his face still pressed against the floor. "Mr. Preston, I can explain everything. It is a misunderstanding. I can pay the money back." "You cannot pay back a single dime." Preston fired back mercilessly. "Because you do not have any money. The board of directors just concluded our emergency vote 10 minutes ago. Gavin, you are hereby terminated from this company, effective immediately." The words hung in the air, but the chief executive officer was not finished. Furthermore, Preston continued, dropping the final, devastating hammer. "Because you committed gross misconduct and felony fraud against this corporation, we are triggering the penalty clauses in your employment contract. Your termination is effective retroactively to midnight last night. That means your severance package is entirely voided. Your unvested stock options are permanently canceled. Your corporate health insurance is terminated. You will not receive a single penny of golden parachute compensation." Sienna let out another loud wail from her chair, realizing that her supposed billionaire was now completely unemployed and entirely broke. "Our legal team is currently sitting in a conference room with agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation," Preston concluded, his voice turning completely cold and clinical. "We are handing over your corporate laptop, your internal email server data, and Natalie's forensic report. The federal authorities are drafting the arrest warrants right now. Do not bother trying to call the office, Gavin. Your corporate phone is disabled. Goodbye." The line went dead with a sharp final click. I lowered my phone and slid it back into my pocket. The silence that swept over the cabana was heavier than the humid tropical air. The execution was flawless. Gavin had spent his entire adult life building a fortress of lies fueled by arrogance and stolen wealth. In less than 3 hours, I had burned that fortress entirely to the ground, leaving him with absolutely nothing but the wet clothes on his back. Jamal slowly shifted his weight, pulling his heavy knee off Gavin's spine. He stood up, towering over my ruined husband. Gavin did not even try to stand or run. He simply rolled onto his side, curling into a pathetic ball on the damp wooden deck. His entire corporate identity, his wealth, and his arrogant pride had just been completely deleted by a single phone call. Before anyone could say another word, the crowd of wealthy onlookers suddenly parted. A tall, distinguished man in a pristine white maritime uniform marched into the VIP cabana area. He was flanked by 4 massive maritime security officers wearing tactical vests. It was the commanding officer of the Oasis of the Seas. He had clearly been alerted by the resort management about the physical altercation occurring in his exclusive passenger section. "What in the world is going on here?" the captain demanded. His voice projected with the practiced, booming authority of a man used to commanding thousands of people at sea. He stopped at the edge of our table, looking down at the spilled caviar, the shattered champagne glass, and Gavin sobbing quietly on the floor. "I will not tolerate this kind of violent behavior from my passengers. Who is responsible for this disturbance?" Jamal smoothly stepped forward, placing himself between me and the ship's security team. He did not look intimidated by the armed officers at all. He reached into his tactical jacket and pulled out his heavy leather wallet, flipping open his solid gold federal shield for the captain to see. "Captain, my name is Jamal Carter, former United States Marshal and current Director of Vanguard Defense," Jamal stated firmly. "There is no disturbance here. We are simply conducting a preliminary containment operation. The man crying on your floor is currently the primary suspect in a multi-million-dollar federal corporate embezzlement and international money laundering investigation." The captain frowned, leaning in to carefully inspect Jamal's credentials. Satisfied with the authenticity of the badge, he signaled for his own security officers to stand down. "Are you telling me I have a federal fugitive sitting in my VIP enclosure?" the captain asked, his tone shifting instantly from angry to deeply concerned. "That is exactly what I am telling you," Jamal replied, crossing his massive arms. His chief executive officer just confirmed the fraud over the phone. A team of Federal Bureau of Investigation agents is currently sitting in his corporate headquarters in Miami, drafting the official arrest warrants as we speak. Furthermore, the $35,000 booking for his royal suite was purchased using stolen corporate funds. The captain's jaw visibly tightened. Maritime law is incredibly strict, and cruise lines spend millions of dollars every single year, ensuring they comply with international regulations. The absolute last thing a ship captain wants is federal agents raiding his vessel at a port of entry, disrupting the vacation of thousands of paying customers. Jamal leaned in, slightly lowering his voice, just enough to make it a private professional warning between two men of authority. Under international maritime harboring laws, Captain, if you knowingly transport a wanted federal fugitive across international waters, your vessel can be seized upon arrival in Miami. Your cruise line will face millions of dollars in regulatory fines, and your personal maritime license will be permanently revoked for obstruction of justice. You cannot let him back on that ship." The captain looked from Jamal to Gavin, his expression hardening into absolute granite. He had a massive floating city to run and a pristine corporate reputation to protect. He was not going to risk his entire career for a pathetic thief. The captain turned to his lead security officer. "Contact the ship purser immediately," he ordered sharply. "I want the boarding passes for the royal suite permanently cancelled." Sienna gasped loudly, clutching the brim of her designer sun hat. "Wait! You cannot do that!" she cried out, her voice echoing across the pool. "All of my expensive clothes and my makeup are in that room. You cannot just leave us here." The captain ignored her completely. He looked over at Richard and Diane, who were trying very hard to blend into the floral arrangements at the back of the cabana. "Are these two individuals traveling with the suspect?" the captain asked, pointing directly at my in-laws. "Yes, they are," I spoke up, stepping forward to stand next to Jamal. Their entire vacation package was booked and paid for by Gavin under the exact same fraudulent credit card transaction. Diane let out a loud gasp. "That is completely unfair," she shrieked, stepping forward with her hands waving frantically. "We are completely innocent in all of this. We did not know where the money came from. We are elderly guests. You cannot just kick us off a ship we are already on. We have rights." "Madam, I absolutely can," the captain replied coldly, cutting off her hysterical rant. "This is a private commercial vessel, and I have absolute discretion over who sails on it. Since your tickets were purchased with stolen money, your presence on my ship is a massive legal liability. Your boarding passes are officially revoked. None of you are permitted to set foot on the oasis of the seas ever again." The captain did not wait for Diane to formulate another argument. He turned his back on her and signaled to his lead security officer with a sharp wave of his hand. Within minutes, the efficiency of the cruise line staff was on full display. A small fleet of motorized utility carts zipped down the resort promenade, cutting right through the beautifully manicured pathways. They bypassed the elegant fountains and pulled up directly to the edge of the VIP cabana enclosure. The resort guests watched in absolute fascination as 4 crew members began unloading the luggage. There was no white glove service. There was no careful handling of the expensive designer luggage. The crew members simply grabbed the heavy suitcases by their handles and unceremoniously dropped them right onto the wooden deck. The heavy thud of the bags hitting the floor echoed like a final devastating judgment. Sienna let out a high-pitched shriek as a massive, bright pink hard-shell suitcase hit the ground and bounced slightly. "Hey, be careful with that!" she cried out, taking a step toward the crew members. "There are thousands of dollars of designer clothes and expensive skincare products in there. You are going to break my things." One of the crew members, a young man who had clearly been briefed on the situation, looked at her with an expression of complete apathy. He dropped a matching makeup train case right next to her feet and turned away without saying a single word. Diane rushed forward, her silk caftan flapping wildly in the ocean breeze. She frantically inspected her own matching set of expensive leather luggage. "This is completely barbaric," Diane complained loudly to anyone who would listen. "You cannot just dump our belongings on the ground like common garbage. We paid for a premium package. We expect premium service." "You did not pay for anything, Diane," I reminded her, my voice slicing through her ridiculous complaints. "That premium package was funded by your granddaughter's stolen college tuition. The cruise line is simply taking out the trash." Richard stood silently next to the pile of bags, staring blankly at his tropical fedora, which had somehow been crushed inside one of the outer suitcase pockets. The reality of being stranded on a foreign island, with no return ticket, and a son facing federal prison, had finally broken his spirit, completely. Gavin slowly pushed himself off the damp wooden deck. His expensive white linen shirt was stained with spilled champagne dirt and black caviar. His hair was a tangled mess. He looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant pharmaceutical executive who had been bragging about his wealth just half an hour ago. He stumbled toward the captain, holding his hands out in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Please," Captain Gavin begged, his voice trembling with sheer panic. "You have to let us back on the ship, just to get back to Miami. I do not have a return flight booked. I just lost my job. The federal authorities are waiting for me. If I do not return to the United States immediately, they will add flight to avoid prosecution to my charges. You have to give us passage back to the mainland." The captain looked at Gavin with a mixture of pity and intense disgust. "My primary responsibility is the safety and legal compliance of my vessel," the captain stated firmly. "You used stolen corporate funds to board my ship, making your ticket completely invalid. More importantly, I will not allow my cruise line to become an accessory to international money laundering. You are no longer my passenger. How you return to Florida is entirely your own problem. But we have nowhere to go." Gavin pleaded, tears welling up in his eyes again. He turned and pointed a shaking finger at Jamal and me. "She took everything. My company disabled my corporate accounts. I have no way to pay for a commercial flight." Jamal crossed his arms, staring down at my husband with cold satisfaction. "You should have thought about your travel logistics before you abandoned your daughter in the dark," Jamal said. "The federal authorities know exactly where you are, Gavin. If you try to run, I will personally hunt you down." The captain turned to his security detail. "We are done here," he announced. "Ensure these individuals do not attempt to bypass the Port Authority gates." As the captain and his security team marched away from the cabana, a massive, deafening sound suddenly vibrated through the tropical air. It was the deep, booming horn of the Oasis of the Seas. The sound echoed across the entire island, a massive mechanical roar signaling the ship's imminent departure. I looked out over the infinity pool toward the private dock. The heavy mooring lines were already being released. The massive floating city was preparing to leave the Bahamas, taking with it the luxurious fantasy Gavin had stolen so much to build. Gavin fell to his knees right beside his dumped luggage, He buried his face in his hands, completely broken. The ship's horn blew a second time, sealing his fate on the island. The wealthy vacationers in the cabana began to slowly disperse, shaking their heads and murmuring about the incredible spectacle they had just witnessed. Nobody offered Gavin a hand. Nobody offered Sienna a tissue. They were entirely isolated, surrounded by their expensive bags, with absolutely nowhere to go. I stood tall, feeling the warm ocean breeze against my face, knowing the hardest part of the battle was finally over. The destruction of his paradise was absolute. The massive cruise ship slowly pulled away from the dock, leaving Gavin and his enablers entirely behind. Gavin watched it go, his eyes wide and bloodshot. The reality of his situation was finally overriding his shock. He was stranded on an expensive island in the Bahamas, with his mistress, his elderly parents, and a mountain of luggage. The tropical sun was beginning to beat down aggressively on the wooden deck. Sienna was already complaining, fanning her face and whining about how the heat was going to ruin her expensive makeup. Gavin scrambled to his feet, his survival instincts kicking in. He frantically patted his wet pockets until he retrieved his leather wallet. He pulled out a sleek platinum credit card, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He turned to the resort cabana manager, who was still standing nearby, observing the chaotic aftermath. "I need a room," Gavin demanded, his voice raspy and desperate. He shoved the card toward the manager. "I need your best available suite for the night, and I need a private car to take us to the commercial airport tomorrow morning. Just put it all on this card. Put a $10,000 hold on it if you have to. Just get us out of this heat immediately." The manager looked at the card, then looked at Jamal, who simply gave a slight shrug. The manager pulled a mobile payment terminal from his apron and inserted Gavin's credit card. The machine beeped, processing the transaction over the resort's wireless network. We all stood in silence. A few seconds later, the machine let out a harsh buzzing sound. The small screen flashed in bright red letters. "I am sorry, sir," the manager said coldly. "The card has been declined." Gavin snatched the card back, his face flushing with panic. "That is impossible," he snapped. "That is a premium corporate travel card. Run it again. Or wait, try this one." He pulled out his primary personal credit card and jammed it into the terminal himself. The machine processed for 3 seconds before buzzing again. Declined. Gavin's breathing became shallow. He pulled out a third card, then a fourth, sliding them frantically through the machine. Declined, declined, declined. "This is just an international security block," Gavin muttered to himself, trying to rationalize the situation. "My bank must have flagged the sudden overseas charges. I just need to log into my application and authorize the transactions to clear the security hold." He pulled out his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen as he opened his banking application. He typed in his credentials and pressed enter. I watched his face as the screen loaded. The absolute horror that washed over his features was incredibly satisfying. The application did not show his account balances. It simply displayed a stark error message stating that his accounts were locked and he needed to contact his financial institution immediately. "You can stop swiping your plastic, Gavin," I said, taking a slow step toward him. A smile finally broke across my face. It was the smile of an auditor who had successfully balanced the ledger. "Your bank did not flag those cards for international travel." "I did." Gavin slowly looked up from his phone, his eyes filled with sheer terror. "While I was flying over the ocean this morning, I did not just call your chief executive officer," I explained smoothly. "I also called my corporate attorney. I provided him with the exact same forensic evidence of your wire fraud. He immediately filed an emergency ex parte injunction with a judge in Miami. Because you used our joint accounts to funnel stolen corporate money, the federal authorities instructed the bank to execute an immediate total freeze on all of your financial assets." Sienna stopped fanning herself, her jaw dropping open as the reality of her sudden poverty washed over her entirely. Richard and Diane stood perfectly still, their expensive tropical vacation outfits looking absolutely ridiculous as they silently listened to their doom. Every single bank account attached to your social security number is completely locked, I continued, my voice echoing clearly. Your credit cards are deactivated, your lines of credit are suspended, you cannot buy a hotel room, you cannot buy a commercial plane ticket, you literally cannot even buy a single bottle of water from this resort. You are completely and utterly destitute. Gavin stared at his useless platinum cards, the plastic suddenly representing nothing but his colossal failure. He had spent his entire life valuing people based solely on their financial worth. Now his net worth was absolutely zero. He was stranded in a tropical paradise, with no shelter, no food, and no escape route, entirely at the mercy of the elements, and his utterly devastating and entirely avoidable personal choices. The tropical sun was growing hotter, reflecting harshly off the wooden deck of the cabana. Gavin remained on his knees, clutching his useless plastic credit cards. He was completely broken, but my attention shifted to the two people who had spent their entire lives enabling his catastrophic behavior. Diane and Richard were staring at the departing cruise ship, the reality of their situation finally piercing through their immense entitlement. They had no access to Gavin's money, and since they lived entirely off the allowance he provided them from his stolen corporate funds, their own bank accounts were likely just as empty. Diane slowly turned away from the ocean and looked at me. The arrogant, condescending mother-in-law who had just threatened to call Child Protective Services was suddenly gone. In her place was a terrified, desperate older woman who realized she was stranded in a foreign country with absolutely no way to pay for a flight, a hotel, or even a taxi. She took a hesitant step toward me, her hands clasped together in a pathetic display of submission. "Natalie, please," Diane whispered, her voice shaking violently. "You have made your point. You have completely ruined him. But Richard and I had nothing to do with the corporate money. We are senior citizens. We cannot stay out here in the sun. We have medical conditions. Please, you have to let us ride back to Miami with you on the helicopter. We will not say a single word. We just need to go home." Richard stepped up right behind her, nodding frantically. "We will leave Gavin here," Richard added completely, throwing his own son to the wolves to save himself. "He made his bed, and he can lie in it. But you cannot leave us here. We are family. You cannot just abandon us on an island." I looked at the two of them, feeling a deep, profound sense of disgust. They were perfectly willing to abandon my 8-year-old daughter in a dark house. They were perfectly willing to watch Gavin replace me with a 25-year-old assistant. They were perfectly willing to commit perjury to steal my child. But the absolute second their own comfort was threatened, they immediately turned on their golden boy and begged for my mercy. "You are not my family," I stated, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "You lost the right to call yourselves my family the moment you boarded that ship knowing Lily was left behind." I reached into my heavy tote bag for the absolute final time. I bypassed the encrypted tablet and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I had prepared this specific document the moment I discovered their names on the cruise ship passenger manifest. I held the envelope out. Richard instinctively reached forward and took it, his hands trembling as he stared at the official legal seal stamped on the front. "What is this?" Richard asked, his voice barely audible over the sound of the ocean breeze. "That is a formal, legally binding 30-day notice of eviction," I replied smoothly. Diane gasped, her eyes widening in sheer horror. "Eviction!" she shrieked, clutching her chest. "You cannot evict us. Gavin pays the rent on our luxury condominium. He leased it for us." "Gavin told you he paid the rent," I corrected her, taking a slow step forward. "Just like Gavin told you he was a highly successful executive, just like he told you he paid for this vacation. But Gavin has terrible credit, and he could not qualify for a lease in that exclusive building. 3 years ago, when you wanted to move into that beautiful gated community, I was the one who secured the property. The condominium is owned entirely by a limited liability company that I control. I am your legal landlord." Richard ripped open the envelope and pulled out the legal documents. His eyes scanned the heavy black text confirming everything I was saying. I heavily subsidized your rent for 3 years because I wanted my daughter to have a stable relationship with her grandparents, I explained, looking dead into Diane's panicked eyes. But you clearly have no interest in protecting my daughter. So the charity is officially over. You have exactly 30 days from today to pack up all of your belongings and vacate the premises. If you are not out by the end of the month, the Miami-Dade County Sheriff will physically remove you and place your belongings on the curb. But where are we supposed to go? Diane cried out, tears finally streaming down her heavily made-up face. We have no savings. We cannot afford first and last month's rent anywhere else. You are making us completely homeless. I suggest you start looking for a very cheap motel, I said coldly. Or perhaps Sienna has some extra room in her apartment since she was so eager to join your family. I turned my back on them. I did not want to look at their faces for another single second. Jamal stepped up beside me, placing a heavy protective hand on my shoulder. He looked back at the pathetic group of cheaters and enablers, giving them one final terrifying glare before turning to walk away with me. We walked back down the beautiful manicured resort promenade, leaving Gavin, Sienna, Richard, and Diane standing entirely alone next to a pile of dumped luggage. They had absolutely no money, no hotel room, no return flight, and no home waiting for them in Miami. They were completely trapped in the luxurious paradise they had stolen, forced to sit in the blistering heat and fully digest the absolute ruin they had brought upon themselves. The walk back to the helipad felt completely different from the sprint we made an hour earlier. The heavy weight of betrayal that crushed my chest since 2 in the morning was completely gone. In its place was a sharp sense of clarity. We walked past the luxury cabanas and infinity pools, but the manufactured paradise did not make me sick anymore. It just looked like an expensive stage where my ex-husband performed his tragic play. Jamal signaled to his pilot as we approached the aircraft on the concrete pad. The twin engines roared to life, the massive rotor blades slicing through the humid tropical air. I climbed into the leather passenger seat, fastened my safety harness, and put the aviation headset over my ears. Jamal climbed in right next to me and pulled the heavy side door shut, sealing us off from the island and the toxic people we were leaving behind. The helicopter lifted off with a powerful surge, banking sharply over the crystal blue waters of the Bahamas. I looked out the window one last time. From 1,000 feet in the air, the VIP cabana enclosure looked incredibly small and insignificant. I could not distinguish the individual figures of Gavin, Sienna, Richard, or Diane anymore. They were just tiny specks left behind on a wooden dock, entirely removed from the reality of my future. I closed my eyes, letting the steady vibration soothe my exhausted nerves. The massive spike of adrenaline that fueled my actions through the night finally began to recede. My hands, which had been clenched into tight fists for hours, slowly relaxed in my lap. I expected the drop in adrenaline to bring a crushing wave of grief, but the tears never came. Instead, a profound sense of empowerment washed completely over me. The man I loved tried to steal my daughter's future and destroy my sanity. But I did not shatter. I weaponized my intelligence, tracked his lies, and dismantled his life with precision. I was the architect of my own justice. "You did really good today," Natalie, Jamal said through the headset intercom. His deep voice was filled with unwavering pride. "You handled that entire confrontation like a seasoned federal operative. He never saw it coming." I opened my eyes and looked at my brother-in-law. "I could not have done it without you, Jamal. Thank you for having my back." "Always," he replied, giving me a respectful nod. "That is what real family does." The flight back over the Atlantic Ocean felt incredibly short. Soon the glowing skyline of Miami appeared on the horizon, bathed in the morning sun. We touched down smoothly at the private hangar. The black sport utility vehicle was waiting on the tarmac. We sped directly onto the highway, heading straight for Jamal's secured suburban home. Every single second of that drive felt like an eternity. The calculating forensic accountant was officially off the clock. I was just a mother desperate to hold her child. When the vehicle pulled into the wide driveway, I had my hand on the door handle before we even stopped. I sprinted up the front walkway and threw the heavy oak door open. My sister was sitting in the living room holding coffee, but my eyes instantly bypassed her entirely. Curled up on the large sectional sofa, wrapped securely in a thick woven blanket and watching bright cartoons on the television, was Lily. "Mom." Lily yelled, dropping her blanket the absolute second she saw me. She jumped off the couch and ran across the living room. I dropped to my knees and caught her wrapping my arms around her small body so tightly I thought I might never let go. I buried my face in her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. The tears I denied myself all night broke loose, spilling fast down my cheeks. They were not tears of pain. They were tears of absolute relief. "I am right here, sweetheart," I whispered, kissing the top of her head repeatedly. "I am right here. You are perfectly safe now." "I was so scared when the lights went out," she murmured, burying her face deeply into my shoulder. "Daddy never came back with the milk." "I know, baby, I know," I said, pulling back just enough to look into her brown eyes. "But listen to me very carefully, Lily. You are never going to be left in the dark ever again. I am always going to protect you, and nobody is ever going to take anything away from you as long as I am breathing." I pulled her back into my arms, holding my entire world tightly against my chest. The storm was officially over. 3 months have passed since that humid morning on the wooden deck in the Bahamas. The transition from absolute chaos to profound peace was surprisingly fast. Summer turned into early autumn, bringing a fresh, crisp breeze to Miami. Lily went back to school, her laughter echoing through our home once again, completely untouched by the toxic storm her father had tried to drag us into. While my daughter and I moved forward with our lives, the absolute destruction I had set in motion caught up to the people who deserved it the most. The federal justice system moves slowly, but when it finally strikes, it strikes with devastating precision. Gavin was formally indicted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation just 4 weeks after the cruise ship left him stranded on the island. Because I had handed the federal agents a perfectly organized, fully annotated forensic audit, the prosecution did not have to spend months building a case. The evidence was absolutely airtight. Gavin was charged with multiple counts of corporate embezzlement, international money laundering, and felony wire fraud. I saw his mugshot when it was published in the local Miami Business Journal. The arrogant, slick pharmaceutical executive was completely gone. In the photograph, he looked hollow, terrified, and visibly aged. Because his assets remained entirely frozen by the emergency injunction, he could not afford a high-powered defense attorney. He was assigned a public defender who quickly advised him that fighting the mountain of financial data was completely useless. Gavin is currently sitting in a federal holding facility, awaiting his official sentencing hearing. The prosecution is aggressively seeking a mandatory 10-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. He will not be eligible for early parole. Sienna initially thought she could outsmart the federal investigators. When the agents brought her in for questioning, she immediately turned on Gavin. She offered to flip on him, crying in the interrogation room and claiming she was just a naive girl manipulated by an older man. She offered to testify against him in exchange for total immunity. The federal prosecutors accepted her testimony, but immunity from prison did not mean immunity from consequence. The Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation executed an immediate, ruthless civil asset forfeiture on the offshore shell company and everything purchased with the stolen funds. Sienna was forced to stand on the sidewalk outside her apartment building while federal agents systematically repossessed her entire fake lifestyle. They confiscated her luxury sports car. They boxed up her designer handbags, her expensive shoes, and her high-end electronics. They even forced her to hand over the massive diamond engagement ring right there on the street. Her social media influencer career completely imploded overnight when the details of the scandal leaked online. Her followers abandoned her brands, blacklisted her, and she was left with absolutely nothing. Last I heard, she was working double shifts at a cheap retail clothing store just to make rent, entirely erased from the glamorous social circles she had sacrificed her dignity to enter. But perhaps the most poetic justice belonged to Richard and Diane. My 30-day eviction notice was not a bluff. When the month expired, they had not secured a new place to live. They tried to reach out to other family members, desperately begging for loans or a spare bedroom. But the story of how Gavin stole his own 8-year-old daughter's college fund and how his parents had happily eaten caviar on a vacation paid for with that stolen money had spread like wildfire through our extended family. They were completely excommunicated. Nobody wanted anything to do with them. When the county sheriff arrived to enforce the eviction, Richard and Diane were forced to pack whatever they could fit into their outdated sedan. They now live in a dingy, cheap motel located right off a noisy interstate highway on the outskirts of Miami. The country club memberships, the silk caftans, and the arrogant lectures about family loyalty are completely gone. Their precious social status has been entirely eradicated. Diane spends her days watching daytime television in a room that smells like stale cigarette smoke, while Richard tries to stretch their meager Social Security checks to cover microwave dinners. They traded their beautiful granddaughter and a comfortable retirement for a fleeting moment of stolen luxury, and they are now paying the ultimate price in absolute isolation. I did not just focus on their destruction, I also focused on rebuilding what Gavin tried to ruin. Through a combination of corporate insurance claims and direct restitution agreements negotiated by the federal prosecutors, Lily's college fund was fully restored. Jamal and his wife came over every Sunday for a family barbecue, filling our backyard with genuine laughter and actual love. Lily never asked about her father. She understood that the man who left her in the dark was gone, and the people who truly loved her were standing right beside her in the light. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely deserved. I watched from a safe distance as the legal and financial consequences dismantled every single lie they had built their lives upon. They learned the hard way that you should never underestimate a woman who knows exactly how to follow the money. I am sitting at a massive mahogany desk in a corner office on the 40th floor of a downtown Miami high-rise. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, I have a perfect, unobstructed view of the Atlantic Ocean. It is the exact same ocean I flew over in a helicopter all those months ago. But today, I am not looking at it with panic or rage. I am looking at it with absolute, undeniable victory. The heavy glass door to my office features a brand new frosted silver plaque. It lists my name, followed immediately by the title of Senior Partner. Uncovering Gavin's $1.2 million embezzlement scheme did not just secure my personal freedom, it skyrocketed my professional career. When the executive board of the pharmaceutical company realized the sheer magnitude of the fraud I had exposed, they fired their entire internal auditing department. Then Mr. Preston personally hired my firm to handle all of their corporate compliance moving forward. He specifically requested that I lead the account. The massive influx of revenue from that single corporate contract gave my firm the exact leverage it needed to offer me a full partnership. I now own a significant equity stake in one of the top financial investigation firms in the country. With my new partnership income and the money I saved from Gavin's absolute inability to touch my assets, I made another major life change. Walking through our old house in the suburbs felt heavy. Every hallway held a memory of his fake apologies, and the kitchen still reminded Lily of the terrifying night the power went out. So I sold the property. Because the quiet title deed was completely legally binding, I did not have to share a single penny of the massive profit from the sale. I used those funds to purchase a beautiful modern penthouse in a highly secure, family-friendly gated community. It has massive windows, a wraparound balcony, and a state-of-the-art security system. Jamal personally oversaw the installation of every single camera and smart lock. Lily has a massive bedroom painted bright yellow, filled with sunlight and completely safe from the shadows of her past. She is thriving. She joined a local soccer team, she is excelling in her classes, and her bright, beautiful smile has completely returned. The family court proceedings were incredibly brief and entirely one-sided. Gavin did not even bother to show up to the custody hearing, primarily because he was sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting his criminal sentencing. The family court judge reviewed the police report from the night he abandoned Lily, read the federal indictment regarding the stolen college funds, and immediately granted me sole legal and physical custody. Gavin lost all parental rights. He is not allowed to contact her, and Richard and Diane were firmly denied any grandparent visitation rights by the state of Florida. The legal severing of our ties was absolute and permanent. Sometimes I think back to that chilling 2 o'clock in the morning phone call. I think about the societal expectation for women to crumble when their hearts are broken. Society expects the betrayed wife to cry, to scream, to beg for closure, or to engage in a messy emotional war. Gavin certainly expected that. He banked his entire fraudulent lifestyle on the assumption that I would be too emotional to see the financial reality of his betrayal. He assumed my love for our family would blind me to his theft. But betrayal does not require a dramatic emotional breakdown. Sometimes the most devastating response to absolute disrespect is cold, calculated action. I chose data over drama. I chose financial forensics over frantic arguments. I systematically dismantled his lies not with my voice, but with undeniable, irrefutable proof. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic environment, or if you have ever had to rebuild your life from absolute scratch after someone tried to break you, I want to hear your story. Share your journey of resilience in the comments below. We gain strength from hearing how others have conquered their darkest moments. If my story gave you a sense of justice today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content about taking back your power. Share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that they are entirely capable of rewriting their own ending. You do not have to accept the narrative someone else tries to force upon you. You have the power to audit your own life, remove the toxic liabilities, and invest entirely in your own future. Never mistake a quiet woman for a weak one, especially if she knows how to read a balance sheet. The story of Natalie's revenge is incredibly thrilling, but beneath the dramatic island confrontation lies a profound and grounding lesson. True power and resilience come from maintaining emotional composure and relying on hard facts. The ultimate defense against manipulation is not a louder voice, but a much sharper mind. Gavin believed he could completely destroy his wife because he mistook her quiet professional dedication for absolute weakness. He relied on the traditional assumption that a betrayed spouse would instantly crumble into emotional chaos, making reckless mistakes and losing control of the narrative. However, this story brilliantly proves that maintaining absolute restraint while armed with undeniable data is far more devastating than engaging in a chaotic screaming match. Financial literacy was Natalie's ultimate shield. By deeply understanding the numbers, the legal contracts, and the corporate paper trails, she systematically stripped her abuser of the very tools he used to control their family. She did not need to hurl baseless insults, because the financial spreadsheets did all the talking for her. This teaches us a vital practical lesson about personal independence. We must actively participate in our own lives, especially regarding our financial security and legal standing. We simply cannot afford to be passive passengers while someone else dictates our future and manages our resources. True independence means knowing exactly where your assets are, understanding your legal rights, and never relinquishing your personal power just to maintain a false sense of peace. When faced with unthinkable betrayal, the most empowering response is to step back, gather your undeniable evidence, and act with surgical precision. Emotional discipline allows you to see the reality of your situation with absolute clarity. Take control of your financial future today by educating yourself about your accounts, establishing firm boundaries, and never allowing anyone to hold your personal independence hostage.